Welcome back, Earth Anchors. Welcome back, Solutionaries. I am excited. I am actually really keyed in. Dr. Tatiana Irvin and Shelley Whitehouse. Shelley,
Hello,
hey.
everybody.
What are we
Great
keyed
to be
in to
here.
talk about today, Shelley? What is coming to the conclusion of our 5-week series that, of course, pre-Q&A is our last topic that we're excited to get into today?
Yeah, I know it's our last topic and we're talking about a permaculture state of mind. And we'll go into more of, what exactly is a permaculture state of mind. But I feel like there's so much momentum with these conversations that we might just carry on.
Well, we've talked about that. Just our following, our students, those of you that are caught up in how do I implement some of these day-to-day, as the moment arises strategies to really feel consciously awake and aware of my surroundings, of sentience all around me. There is going to be an ongoing dialogue, and there's going to be Q&A, and there's going to be some, fine-tuning and nuancing, and we're here for that. We're here for those conversations, aren't we, Shelley?
Yeah. One of my favorite sayings, there's an author named Joan Didion, and a lot of people will have heard of her. And she says, I write to know what I think, which I love. And these conversations are a little bit like that for me as well. They help me process so much of the information that is swirling around in our vortex right now from so many different avenues and philosophies, and things are changing so quickly, to help me pay attention to, okay, what's right for me? What does this mean? How do I stay anchored and centered throughout the chaos? And so these conversations are, I know they're teaching modules, but for me, it's also an anchoring process.
That's the goal of Earth Anchoring. I mean, you really synopsized that completely. And while I relate completely also to this author that you just mentioned, I think that in my case, and maybe even in this ongoing dialogue with Shelley, I think that you and I speak. I think that you and I get into the pontification of this dialogue to better bring about all of the pieces that are seeking to merge, to better understand how we
that's what it's really evolved to for me.
Good. Well, and so without further ado, what is a permaculture state of mind? Shelley and I always talk, prior to hitting the record button and providing you this content. And I am a certified permaculturist. I'm using that term because it was a term that was, it was intended in its catalyzation to remind people that we are in a state of creating culture at all times, mostly unconsciously, at least those of us that follow, those of us that are more followers than leaders. Culture is framed by belief systems and by habituations to that just is the way that it is. And permaculture, coming from the idea of how do we recognize our impact in the world, how do we permeate that culture, how do we create new solutions within that culture. It was born out of organic and regenerative and sustainable models with gardeners and farmers in Australia. And what it contains ultimately is be a permanent part, be a permeable part of creating culture from consciousness. Look at the world as you are a contributor to consciousness. Instead of doing what everyone else has always done without asking why it's done that way, be conscious and I think permeable enough to be able to sense that doesn't feel like it is in my state of flow. So I'm going to question it, and maybe I'll do a little research, and I'll ultimately examine, is it the best thing to be doing for my health, for my home, for my family, on my property, and in my body? And if not, ultimately, it doesn't matter that everyone else is. It isn't going to be part of my permaculture. It isn't going to be part of my implementation. Does that kind of synopsize it? Does that feel good, Shelley?
Yeah, I really like the, I really like that description, and what came up was a more of a permeable state of a permeable culture, where you are making your decisions based on what wants to happen next. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier. When we're working with the horses, anyway, my philosophy of working with the horses and others as well is not so agenda driven, meaning we don't say, okay, the client's showing up at 2:00 and we're going to spend 5 minutes doing this, and then we're going to do this with the horse, and then the next thing we're going to do is lead the horse here, and then we're going to, where we script it all out for the client because we want them to have this experience.
Yeah.
When that's not that may not be in the best interest of the client and or the horse, because if we trust our intuition and that of the horse, and you could say and of the land or of our natural surroundings, but in this instance that of the horse, that the horse has an innate ability to read the client's energy and respond accordingly, and allow the client to discern the information that they need to experience in that moment. And so our role is to notice, create the space, and lean into what wants to happen next to continue to facilitate the evolution of the experience. That doesn't mean you don't have a plan. That doesn't mean there's not maybe specific activities and all that, but it's not driven by the agenda. That's just a simple container. Yeah. So it's permeable.
And it actually follows, based on the way you described it, Shelley, the first discipline of permaculture, which is to observe. And observing is more than just looking at something with your visual acuity. It is listening, it is sensing, it is picking up on that intuitive rapport with, in the case that you've just described, the horses and the client. It also is, what is the land saying today? What is the way that the energy is moving in the currents, in the water flows, in even the sense of what's growing where, because it has its own agenda. And where's it going to be the best place in working with an Earth and Equus model to position, the students to be in the best light, in the best sense of feeling grounded with the horses based on how the flows of the earth and the air and the water have been. I mean, it's all intrinsic,
the wind
isn't
can
it?
Kick in, a hawk can land on the fence, right? Everything that happens has meaning and information.
And contribution, right? Something to offer potentially. Love it. So the observing is key. And as we were talking about pre-conversation, so our friends, Earth Anchors, listen, how often, if you were to be observing of yourself, do you catch yourself walking outside into the world and seeing through a lens that has been conscripted for you, that is basically, this is your door, this is your front yard, this is the walk to get to your car, this is what your lawn looks like, the trees on the front, this is what the neighborhood looks like, and all of this comes about in a certain socially accepted way, a habituated way that you don't even think to question. It just is what it is. Perfect example, it's spring. I throw down the pre-emergent on my yard. I call the guys from True Green. I call my gardener. He comes in and he cuts my trees a certain way because that's what everybody does. He lays down, a bunch of petrochemicals because that's what he does every single time. Or you go and you pick them up from Home Depot and you have your son or your husband do it. We do a lot of things unconsciously when we're not in a permaculture state of mind, when we're not observing and taking in all that information. You're a full sensory being. So full sensory being means you're not just looking, you are feeling, you are intuiting, you are listening, you are divine data downloading. What is happening here and what is my contribution? What is my participation in it? As Earth Anchors, we need to be that way. We need to evolve that and embody that 24/7.
Yeah.
24/7.
It's a big deal. I mean, it's really, I don't know anybody, unless you're, Buddha, that does that 24/7. very few people have, come to that level of awareness and being conscious. I've got to go to the grocery store. I've got to feed my kids. We've got to get to school. It's just life. And there's certain things that can actually happen so many things happen at a completely unconscious level, just because we know the drill. This is how we've always done it. We always take the same roads to the same places going the same direction, and we never vary or turn a different way because it's not efficient. And we're in such a...
Or we're habituated, or we just think this is what I know, and I'm not interested in learning something new. I would rather have the consistent outcome of what I know giving me the results I'm accustomed to. Wouldn't you say, Shelley?
Yeah, and even if we don't... Habit. Yep, and even if those aren't the greatest results, it's what we're used to. And to experience another result would require change and paying attention.
I would assume those that are listening to these recordings recognize there's something absent in their life. There is something that is not its ideal, or they're at least curious to know that there could be another ideal. You're not listening to these videos if everything is exactly as you would idealize, because all of us are growing, and we're nuancing that growth by supplementing new information, new practices, new disciplines. So why does it seem so necessary that a permaculture state of mind be implemented? Just start with taking a moment after this video and asking yourself, when I step away from the video, how do I go into something that might be considered a habituation, a ruminative way of being? Okay, well, I need to go check my watch. That's a ruminative way of being. I need to get off, as you said, to run some errands. I need to go pick something up for one of my children. I need to call someone with regards to a utility bill. All of those things are maybe necessary to our lives, but when routine becomes unconsciousness, unconsciousness breeds expanded unconsciousness, so that we're outside and you didn't have to step on that roly-poly. If you'd even been slightly conscious, you would have realized it was crossing your path. You would have been in the moment you were in, rather than 20 minutes down the road wondering if you were going to make it on time to your appointment.
I got a great example just this morning in the shower.
Good.
And I'm in the shower, and all of a sudden I realize my brain is going 90 miles an hour, and I've had about 150 thoughts in a nanosecond, and none of them really had any content to it. You know what I mean? And some of it was just like nonsense, little thoughts were popping in, and I thought, oh my God, stop. Stop. Not to mention our routine self-analysis, but every time you get in front of the mirror and like, oh, when am I going to drop the last 5 pounds? When I'm going to, all this stuff that is just automatic in our peripheral and that we don't even think about, that we say to ourselves all the time. So I'm in the shower and that's happening, and I thought, okay, just stop. Just notice the water. Just feel the water. Let's feel the water in a different place. Let's feel my feet on the floor. And just allow for 30 seconds of silence in my brain and just notice what's happening in the moment. And it kind of reset my whole attitude. Like when I got out, to be more aware of what was happening instead of planning and thinking about the future or ruminating about the past. Just allowing that moment to just be that moment. Just in that moment. Doesn't mean it doesn't all pop in again.
And why is this so important, Shelley? I mean, you could say, I don't really want to waste my time thinking about thoughts that aren't even serving what my goals of the day happen to be. Obviously, so many of us are recycling the past, or we're in the future. I mean, that is the dilemma of consciousness teaching. It doesn't matter what guru, what avatar, what speaker you're talking to. They will always tell you, humans have a tendency, we have a preponderance to be in the past, or we're projecting ourselves into a future that hasn't been created yet. But what does that short sight us to? Number one, we can't do anything about the past. Let's just get out of the past 100%. If you didn't learn a piece, reflection in a meditative moment can be beneficial, but on a day-to-day moving forward and being in the momentum of the life that you're having right now, the past isn't going to serve you. And for the sake of planning the future, you have to be as present as you possibly can be to even get the outcome that you desire. You have to be living in the desires that you would like to see in the future, being in your present moment anyway. Otherwise, it's always the chase game. You know, what we resist persists, what we chase eludes us. So why is this so important, Shelley, when it comes to the earth anchor work? I know you've just mentioned the horses. As a certified permaculturist, the whole goal is not to come out onto my property and then divide and conquer. I want a garden. I want to have wildflower gardens. I am interested in creating a fire pit and fountains and ponds. The whole idea of permaculture is to say, what did the earth want and what did she create before you arrived there? And I did happen to purchase on property where it had once been a tobacco field that then was kind of left to go back to nature. And so the fascination is, and the respect and the reverence for Mother Gaia and all of her sentience is to walk out into that space and say, before I insert and dominate my will upon this place, what was already here through respectful and observant eyes? What is the earth already in her divine intelligence creating? And how do I find a segue? How do I find a win-win where I can co-create with what is already here rather than be a tyrant and come in and dominate it? Now just take that. Isn't that what's going on?
Yeah.
Look, I mean, if you take that microcosm, isn't that exactly what is wrong with the world at a socioeconomic and political level?
Domination.
My will, as opposed to what is, the fighting of what is, right? It has completely far-reaching and all-encompassing.
It's total ego-driven.
To be out of a permaculture state of mind, which
it really comes from a lack mentality that I must conquer in order to have for me and my family, as opposed to the co-creation of what's happening right now and what's in the best interest of community and all of that. It reminds me of the whole like Darwinian philosophy of strongest of the fittest, which is not really, but it puts it in an individual context as opposed to a community context. And it's really the stronger is in a community context, and the collaboration of community is what creates the strength. And that's not the individual. When it's all about the individual strength, then the community suffers.
True. And the community is suffering. Let's consider how the community is suffering. If most of the world right now, if you look at the data analysis on gross national product as opposed to the quality of life in anywhere from first world countries to third world countries, the amount of poverty is unprecedented for modern times. Why would that be when there is an overflowing abundance of technology and developmental sciences to feed and clothe and shelter and transport humanity? It's because there are those that are seeing things through such a myopic, self-serving lens that they are receiving above and beyond what they can possibly individually or even within their families collectively use, and hoarding it for themselves to the detriment of their fellow man and the rest of the population. In Native American tribes, that would have been considered a mental illness, and the whole tribe would have come together and said, why is it that you think you need more than what you actually can consume, can appreciate, can use? And they would lovingly help them to see that that was a dark ego emergence in themselves, right? And that it is ultimately a developmental mental illness or consciousness misalignment. But this is rampant. It's
an insanity. Yes,
it is an insanity. So where do we start? I can't knock on, the Bilderberger Group or the Club of Rome or the Trilateral Commission with all of its global bankers and its, political junkies that are living off of big lobby money and go, all right, now here, can you see you're being a little greedy, a little selfish? That is the screen outside of me. That is what is, and it is not my job to have an immediate impact on them by going after them. I have to look here. Where am I as this one sentience that looks like a bunch of schizophrenic personalities, as the one humanity that we are all a part? How do I look at my fractalized identity and this character, this personality, and where am I not in a state of that oneness and see the world through how am I creating a permeable culture? How am I creating a healthy and regenerative permanent culture? Where am I unconscious? So that's what we're teaching. That's what we're here to embody. And we're here to support our students and all those that are watching this series. Is it starts with you. Trust me, if you are trashing any of the upcoming presidential hopefuls on Facebook, your culture that you're creating is one of combating. It is of one of who is right and who is wrong. It's going to hold you in a vibe that is going to keep you agitated physically. It might create offense with people that you really don't want to create unpleasant relationships with. And I could go on about it, but I just want to remind those of us that are listening, there's so many key things going on right now. You have to be the observer. Don't we, Shelley? We have to be aware of how we're running our energy and asking, how can I be co-creating in flows, rather than either inserting my will and being a tyrant wherever I go, or being so unconscious that I don't even recognize I'm still part of a chaotic co-creation rather than a harmonious and strategic co-creation.
Yes. Yeah. And I know it can be really difficult when somebody just totally triggers your sense of justice or sanity, even, to hold your peace, to stay present, to what's my responsibility in this conversation? What's my responsibility in the election, or how I spend my dollars? Wherever you focus your attention is where your energy goes. Yeah. So if your energy is going towards the discord, you're going to feel discord.
Yeah.
And when you feel discord, you send out discord. And it's a practice. It takes practice. It takes awareness. It takes an experience of being in alignment for a period of time where you know what it feels like to be anchored and centered. Some people don't even know what it feels like to be anchored and centered because they're never there.
Yeah. And it is a learned behavior. I mean, children, in one of the earlier videos, we showed my infant granddaughter and her connecting with the earth and her giggling and her recentering her feet. We lose this over time because of our tendencies towards, habituation and entrainment with our parents and indoctrination and how we move about the earth. But I want to give two examples, if I can, Shelley, about the importance of grounding, centering, and anchoring, and things that maybe many of us have seen. At any given time, we've seen the sign, keep off the grass, stay on the path. Why do we see those in national parks? Why do we see them in beautiful, manicured grounds at, state or federal owned buildings or private property?
Or botanical gardens.
Yeah. Exactly. Why do we see that? Because there has been a desire to implement a vision of beauty, of symmetry, of order on this footprint, whatever it happens to be, a botanical garden, like we said, the grounds for one of these buildings or one of these venues, that meets the vision of those that have anchored there, that own it and have anchored there, and that are now working with the collective sentience to maintain that degree of order. Nature, if it was left to its own guises, may not do that. It would allow for a little bit of chaos. It would overgrow like jungles overgrow, and we know that that happens very often. But we're co-creators here on this planet. We're not meant to just let the natural world completely overcome our homes and our land and everything else. There's meant to be this beautiful kind of delicate dance that goes back and forth. And so I want to just remind those, when they see that, that is a reminder that our input and our creative contribution is called for, before we kind of set boundaries around maintaining that co-creation. But hopefully a lot of thoughtfulness went in to our architecture of that co-creation first. There's a reason why we're attracted to botanical gardens, or, you know, going and looking at the Tuileries in Versailles, and the beautiful artistic and well thought out you know, artwork and sacred geometry in the land, embodied in the land that we all enjoy. There is a co-creative element, but it should not be in a lack of conscious observance of what the earth wants. And I want to bring in an example. I walked something called the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the way across northern Spain. And there were lots of places with which we were meant to be brought back into focus. The whole walk is meant to keep you in an active moment to moment, being very much in the present, walking meditation, walking self-reflection. And what I noticed is, for those that wanted to race or those that walked unconsciously, there was a real big problem with people having injuries, but more even than injuries, almost everyone you ran across had blisters. Well, what are blisters a sign of? You're walking, not acknowledging that there is a degree of discomfort that is forming on a toe, on a heel, somewhere on your foot. And what I decided when I started to walk was to make my self-reflection so powerful, and prep before, of course, putting those shoes on with various implementations to keep my feet preserved, but to take every step as deliberately as possible, so that if there was even a moment of burn or a moment of rawness, I would stop, I would attend to it. I wasn't in a hurry to get to the next location. And I made it all the way to the end of that 500 and almost 50-mile walk without a blister. I was the only person I knew that didn't have one. And I'm not bragging, folks. This is where being an earth anchor, and I hold myself really fiercely accountable. Fiercely accountable. I have no business talking about it if I'm not doing it. But it took, you couldn't scuff your feet when you were getting tired. It meant stopping and taking a break when you knew that you weren't walking steadily anymore, because the fatigue of your body had created, you know,
that's an awesome example.
So that permaculture state of mind to me is, it's every aspect of our lives, and it is every way with which we interact with the world. Wouldn't you say, Shelley? It doesn't matter whether it's social media or you're walking through the barn. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Tatiana, before we wrap up, do you want to share with people exactly, maybe not exactly, but a little overview of how we're going to be integrating these concepts into our Earth and Equus retreat in November?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go back to empathy, false separate self, that was our first topic. There is going to be not only the academic understanding provided all of our students, but there is going to be some exercises that allow us to feel that false separate self. It's going to be such a personal witness experience. It should change and evolve how you see your sense of connection with the world around you going forward. That's going to be our primer beginning foundation in coming together as a group and building synergy. And then we'll move to empathy and boundaries. Why is it important to, number one, know that we are one and that everything we do affects another, and that butterfly effect? But then how do we use the empathy and the connection and still create some healthy filters around ourselves, and with those healthy filters, some boundaries, so that we're not constantly crashing into each other's field or being invasive, before we've learned other tools around being sensitive with the level of vulnerability and accessibility we have to one another. So we'll talk about those empathy and boundaries, and there will be exercises with it, including working with the horses, right, Shelley? Because the horses mirror those boundaries beautifully. We go into do no harm. We're going to walk the property and go into silent walking meditations, where we are aware of everything around us, and we're careful where we step. We're careful that we don't get so caught up in the walk that we don't run into someone else's space and invade their boundaries. We're going to be much more observant of the world around us and recognize how many things are impacted by our presence in that moment in that given location. And it's going to be a really powerful exercise in do no harm. And then we're going to talk about the renewal cycles that we're going to be witnessing as fall is encroaching, and how beautiful it is to see the renewal cycles before our very eyes, and how it is changing how we use the land, what is immediately available, bioavailable to the horses, to the rabbits, to the raptors, whatever happens to be there. So we'll be observing that macrocosmically, as well as how those renewal cycles are affecting us. And then the permaculture state of mind is really kind of the bow that ties everything together. When we use each of these various faculties and disciplines in Earth and Equus, we can actually make I think, not a practical plan as much as it is an anchored embodiment, a way of being, a new way of being at our foundation, to be able to recognize having a permaculture state of mind is not hard when I have embodied this level of consciousness through this practice and through some of the day-to-day disciplines that I have learned in this retreat and weekend, and the confirmation that I receive from the group, from the land. I think something very powerful will be born out in every single person, that they'll be able to start plugging in with each of those disciplines as a state of mind, as a state of being, which is the synthesis of permaculture.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to mention that, especially for people who are already practitioners of and hold space for others in terms of their transformational development, personal, professional, spiritual, whatever it may be, as a healer or a coach or a facilitator, this is an opportunity to really expand your capabilities and your intuition, your intuitive muscles, so to speak, in terms of bringing more richness and depth to your own practice of holding space for others. So I think that's for the people who are in that realm. Is also, I mean, even just for people who want this for themselves, for their personal life, whether you are a corporate CEO or a banker, or a Reiki master. It's for all humans.
An elementary school teacher. Those of us, that's right. If we're holding a position of power where our energy leadership, the way that we run our energy, is going to have an impact on others, or we want to have a more benevolent impact, it is so all-encompassing. And more than the academic piece, Shelley, I think that you and I are really about it being experiential. We want them to feel
it's
this
an anchoring.
experience.
That's why the focus is anchoring peace and really understanding how to carry that forward outside of the retreat experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a whole new way of being. So we're excited to bring it to you. We're excited to keep anchoring it. The more that we have these discussions and the more that Shelley and I offer this course, the more that we are able to emulate it and magnify it in our own lives. Trust me, it's a win-win across the board. But moving through false separate self, empathy, boundaries, do no harm, renewal cycles, and a permaculture state of mind, the intrinsic factors of earth anchoring in a way that can feel almost bulletproof to all of the global transitions we're having right now. I mean, you can move forward with grace like an avatar when you can embody, anchor, and experientially manifest these in your life. And we're excited to be bringing them to you. Take a look at our websites. Take a look at ShelleyWhitehouse.com. Go and look at Waking Up Solutionary TV on both the website and subscribe and like on YouTube. Waking Up Solutionary TV with Dr. Tatiana. And look at Earth and Equus coming up in November. Give them the dates. Do you have those offhand, Shelley?
November 6th, 7, and 8.
Perfect. We're still filling up that class, and there are some seats left, so we would love to have you. But join in the conversation. Come in for Q&A. Our next gathering is going to be going a little bit deeper into some of the questions that have arisen, and it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. Thank you, Tatiana. You are a beautiful example of this work.
As are you. So grateful for everything you bring to the table. Love and hugs, everybody. Don't forget, we are the solution.
That's right.